I'm Zubin. I'm a lab instructor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and I'm excited to dive into this workshop with all of you today. Um, I've been modeling for over 5 years now, and asset creation is something that I've grown to love and enjoy. And my hope is that by the time we wrap up today, you'll share in that excitement and hopefully feel more confident in your own modeling skills as well. So before we jump in to creating some cool stuff, I'd like to spend some time revisiting some core concepts, right? Um, I know we're all super eager to dive in, but these foundations will help guide your work and will also make it easier for you to understand why I do certain things while I'm modeling, which might be a little confusing sometimes. I'll be using Maya for today's demonstration, but even though the commands and tools in other 3D software may differ, the principles definitely remain the same, right? Also, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. Just give me a shout out if you have any questions or would like me to elaborate a little more on my process, right? That being said, we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's get started. Hello, everyone who is just joining in. Yeah, so I think I would like to start with a show of hands, maybe or just give me a reaction if you've never touched Maya before or have never modeled before. Okay. I'm gonna take that as and everyone has okay, so I go in from Ashley. Ashley, is that a okay, so we have a few people who maybe do not have a lot of experience with Maya. So that being said, then I will touch upon some of the software navigation, but I'll try to keep it comparatively light. So, as I said, firstly, I would like to reinforce some key foundational concepts of modeling that I'm sure you have all been familiarizing yourself with so far. Um, One thing I would also like to add is that as much as I would like to think that modeling is a purely artistic process, there is a little bit of math involved. Okay. That being said, I'm just gonna leave that there and we'll see where this math comes in later. But yeah, let's get started. I'm gonna go through a little bit of software navigation just to break into things a little slowly, and then we'll get the ball rolling, right? I also need to keep an eye. So yeah, it might be hard for me to check out the chat at sometimes, but definitely if you have questions and you don't need them answered right away, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will take a look as soon as I can. Also, yeah, as I said, for anyone who missed it, feel free to interrupt me at any point of time if you feel like you have any questions or would like a little more um, details about why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So with that said, let me just share my screen. Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen? You can give me a thumbs up, raise your hand. Anything works. Okay. We have a few thumbs up, so that's good. Cool. Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of software navigation just to get our feet wet a little, and then we'll jump right in. Okay. So first things first, I'm here in Maya. I have Maya opened already. It's a new clean project and there's nothing in it except this cube. Okay. So just looking at this cube, I'm just gonna navigate a little bit around Maya and see how things are flowing. You can see the buttons that I'm pressing or any commands that I'm using in the lower right hand of my screen. But still, if you're wondering if it's too fast or for any reason you couldn't get exactly what I pressed, feel free to jump in and ask me as well. Okay. So Alt and middle mouse click is to pan. Okay. And let me just turn on the grid here just so that we can get a little more into focus. Alt and middle mouse click is to pan. Alt and right click is to zoom in and zoom out. Alt and left click is to rotate. Okay. These are the main things um, we use for Maya software navigation, right? The last thing I would say is F. F allows you to focus on an object. And yeah, I think that's pretty much. The other thing I would like to say, like any other software, Maya can be a little daunting, right? Because there are so many options up here. There are so many drop down menus and so many things that you can look into. But we are not going to worry about any of those things, at least for today. Okay. There are a few things that I might touch upon. It's definitely probably some stuff that you've seen before. But we're gonna try to break into this a little slowly. So now that we've gone through some basic software navigation, as I said, Alt middle mouse click, pan, Alt right click, zoom in, zoom out, Alt left click is to rotate, right? And that's the basics. I would recommend, it's good if you have Maya to just open it up and get familiar with the software because we're going to be taking a little bit of a deep dive now. Okay, so um, as I said, I would like to reinforce some key foundational concepts of modeling, right? And I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but I would like to touch upon it a little bit once before I start any actual modeling, um, so that you can get an idea of why exactly I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So one of the first things I would like to talk about is subdivision modeling. And subdivision modeling, as we all have come to know and love it, is the workflow that countless artists use in the film and animation industry, right? Creating your models while keeping in mind that they will be subdivided. Okay. That is the main core concept of subdivision modeling. And to kind of reiterate this idea, I have I have a few models here. You can take a look at my screen here, and you can also see what buttons I'm pressing. At sometimes it might get a little distracting because I'm just kind of moving in through Maya. Um, but yeah, maybe when I'm doing something that I would like to shout out, then I'm just gonna tell you. So yeah, as I said, I have been modeling for a while now, and it's definitely been a process, but I've come to know it more and love it more. And there are a lot of things that I'm still learning about it to this day, right? So diving into subdivision modeling. So when I have a cube, right, and this is just a cube that I have here, you can see that I have up here at the top, I have levels. So this is level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Okay, or you can call this level 3. Okay. Now, when I select a cube and I press 3 on my keyboard, 3 is what allows me to subdivide my model at render time. Okay. And while this might seem like some complex statement, it just means that I'm smoothing my mesh, right? Which means that this thing, which is the level 2, is just a cube which I selected, and I went mesh, smooth, okay? When I hit mesh smooth, each of these faces divided into 4 faces, right? And this sphere here is just a cube on which I've pressed mesh, smooth, and I've increased the divisions to 2, okay? Now, if I just click on this last cube and I press 3, it directly crumbles into the sphere, right? But what's different is that I don't see any subdivisions here, right? I'm not seeing any of these faces. I'm not seeing any of these vertices, right? Because here it's just a cube that is actually being subdivided into this sphere, okay? So that's the main thing. And this is, in a nutshell, what subdivision modeling is, right? We're modeling with the intent to subdivide or smooth our meshes, right? And every time you smooth your mesh, your faces get divided into 4, right? So if I have here, in this, I have currently 12 faces. In this one, which has been subdivided once, I have 24 faces, right? This one, which has been subdivided twice, I have 96 faces. So basically, when I press 3 on my keyboard, and again, 3 is the button you press to subdivide your models in Maya. I know in Blender, you have the subdivision modifier. In Maya is just a button click. 1 is to come back to your normal display, and 3 is your subdivision. Okay, so just the number keys. Now, this is what we need to keep in mind whenever we're going to be doing our modeling, right? So now that we've kind of got a grasp over subdivision and we've kind of revisited some concepts within it, we can go a little further. So as I said, I'm going to be starting off a little slow, but then we're going to dive into some actual prop modeling, and that's probably going to be the more fun part for most of you. But I think it is important for us to touch upon some of the fundamentals before we can do that. So yeah, so I hope this is clear, and I hope you have some prior knowledge about this as well, because that is definitely going to help, right? So one last time, if I press 3, my cube becomes a sphere because all I'm doing is I'm going mesh, smooth twice, okay? So I'm subdividing my model, but I'm not adding, I don't have to worry about these extra faces and vertices. Okay. So that's all we need to think about right now. And you might wonder, why is this better than this, right? Why not just go and manually subdivide my mesh so that I get more faces and verts? Because it's not always going to be easy for you to manage something that has these many faces, right? Every time I want to move something, I need to select that face, I need to select that vertice, and I need to move it around, right? And that is gonna take a lot of time. But in this case, when I just have this cube, right, which I have not manually subdivided, I can just select a vert or multiple vertices or a face, and I can just start moving it around to quickly deform that shape, right? So that's definitely going to be helpful. So whenever you're thinking of subdividing your model manually, I would say don't. It's good to work with as less geometry or topology as possible. Okay. Now, edges and edge loops, right? So whenever you're trying to create a shape, and let me just admit some people who are in the waiting room. Okay. So yeah, whenever you're trying to create a shape, you need edge loops, right? Because edge loops are fundamentally what are gonna make your models. In this case, all I'm gonna do to add an edge loop is I'm gonna take this knife tool here at the top, which is my multi-cut tool, and holding down control, right, is gonna allow me to drop an edge loop. Okay, so all I'm doing is selecting my knife tool here at the top, and I'm holding down control to drop an edge loop. Now, the reason I think edges and edge loops are so important is because they are what are going to define your shape. If you don't have edges, you cannot make a shape. Okay, for example, if I wanted to make a T, right? Say I wanted to extrude a T out of this shape. I would need to drop some edge loops like this to form a T so that I can select them and extrude them, right? Something like that. And I'm only be able to get that kind of control because of my edge loops. In the same way, let's say we want to make an O, okay? I would need to drop some edge loops to first be able to make that shape, right? So here I've added some extra edge loops, and now I am able to make that O, right? So now that we understand that whenever we need to deal with a shape, no matter how simple or complex, you're gonna need to add edge loops, right? That being said, let's go down and see what we have further. I'm very, very sure a lot of you have heard of this term beveling, but fencing might be a little more new. Okay. So, um, as I said, there is a necessity of edges to create a shape. Okay. But a lot of times, and even when I was showing you subdivisions, you might have been like, if you're not super familiar with Maya, you might have been like, why do I need to subdivide things, right? Why is that even a necessity? The reason behind it is because in real life, there are no edges that are this sharp. Okay. You can take a knife and you can zoom in on that knife and you're still not going to get this edge, right? Because what you're going to see in real life is some thickness. You're going to see a nice highlight. You're going to see the fall off, right? And that's probably going to look more like this surface right here, right? So whenever things are this sharp or this harsh, it gives things a very CG look or a very computer generated look, right? But our goal is to make things look realistic. And for that, we do want to have this nice roll off, this nice highlight. And that is only possible when we start subdividing our models, right? So here, when I have my cube and I press 3, just like we saw earlier, right here, it crumbles into a ball, right? And you must have been like, he's using a cube. Why is it crumbling into a ball? The reason behind it is because I do not have enough edge loops, right? As I said, edge loops are necessary to define form. And by adding them, I am going to be able to get that form. So if I just take this multi-cut tool right up here and I start dropping a few edge loops, you're going to see that now when I press 3, this is actually holding up its shape much, much better, right? So I start dropping even more, and now my cube is actually trying to hold itself together instead of completely falling apart, right? Now, this is what is known as fencing, okay? So you see I have fencing here. What fencing is when we drop edge loops like this, okay? I'm just holding down control with my multi-cut tool selected, and I'm just dropping a few edge loops, right? And this is fencing in a nutshell. The other thing is bevels, which I'm sure everyone has heard a ton about. And bevels are when you actually select the edges when you want to, the edges that you want to keep sharp or the edges that you want to hold up when you smooth your mesh. And I'm just using a shortcut, which is shift right click. And then I go to the bevel. Because shift right click, I think in my mind is single-handedly one of the best marking menus for modeling in Maya. if you press shift and right click, I assure you, you can access most of the modeling tools that you need in Maya. Okay. So just shift right click and I'm going to bevel, and I can just, all of these fraction segment depth, I can just slide on them. Okay. And that is going to give me that control. So I can slide and I can add some segments. Okay. And now this is a bevel, right? So this was just fencing where I was just dropping edge loops, but this is where I manually kind of selected my edges and I performed the bevel command on them. So when a bevel happens, every edge is split into two and they both average out, right? So if I add another segment in between these, a third one comes in and it averages out even more. So we get a nice smooth curve, right? And now when I press 3, I'm getting quite a nice highlight, right? It's not like the super sharp one. So now that we have that in mind, we just have two last things to go through before we can start some real modeling, right? Um, One thing that I think is very important is in subdivision, in any kind of modeling workflow, I think quads are key. Okay, quads are square polygons basically. Each one of these is a polygon, right? And quads are um, what are gonna help you get your clean highlights. What I mean by that is, so here, if we take a look at this shape, right? I can see that there are some really long faces here, okay? And these faces actually have a lot of surface area, but they're not like these square ones, right? So the square ones are more balanced, and that's always going to be the best shape for you to go for. But shapes like this, which are more rectangular and more stretched, are stuff that you want to avoid mostly. Whenever you're trying to model something, I would say go for quads and try to have your polygons be as square as possible, because that is probably what's going to give you the best mesh that you can have. That being said, if I press 3 right now to subdivide my model, what I can see here is some very weird highlights. Okay, so I don't know if it's super clear to visualize, but what I'm able to see here is right at this corner, I'm getting some very weird pinching effect. And imagine I'm getting this on a straight or a flat surface. What I would be getting on a curved surface would be absolutely crazy. Okay. So something like this is much better. This is able to hold the shape, the same shape that I was doing here, but you can see that here my squares or my polygons are closer to squares than here, right? So even though they're a little out of shape, these ones are the closest to proper quads or proper squares. And this is the type of topology we want to aim for, right? So, um, and the topology being the makeup of your model, right? Every model is made of quads and faces and vertices and edges, right? And all of those combined is your topology for your model. That being said, let's come here. I have two examples that I'm just gonna kind of bevel and to get a sense of how I tackle bevel specifically, okay? So whenever I'm trying to bevel, one thing I'm keeping in mind is that I want to select every edge that I want to keep sharp at the same time, right? So I'm trying to select every edge at the same time, okay? So I'm just shift double clicking all of these edges that I want to keep sharp, okay? And let's do these corner ones as well. And I think I've selected all the edges that I want to keep sharp. So usually if I press 3, this is what happens, right? But I don't want this to happen because I want this to hold its shape when I press 3. But I also don't want these super sharp edges. I want nice highlights. So again, shift right click, bevel edge, and I'm gonna add two segments. I think a lot of times two segments is the safest option because when you bevel with two segments, a lot of times what is going to happen is if you have an edge that is situated on the outer corner of an L, when you bevel, it's going to solve itself. Okay. And what I mean by that is, I have a question regarding beveling. While beveling the edges isn't necessary to turn. Yes, definitely. A lot of times you'll see that while okay, so I think this is a direct message, so maybe not everyone can see it. So what Moksh, if I'm getting your name correctly, is asking is regarding the bevel. While beveling edges isn't it necessary to turn off the chamfer option. Okay. Now, what he basically means, or what they basically mean, is that when I'm beveling an edge, or let me show this on a more low poly model. Okay, so when I'm beveling something, okay, what I said is that the bevel is gonna average out your edges, and it's gonna kind of give you this nice curve, right? But there is this option here, which is called the chamfer. And if I turn that off, then basically I am getting the same fencing effect that I was getting here of just dropping the edge loops and not actually letting them have control over my shape. This is definitely going to give you cleaner highlights. But honestly, a lot of times I think it depends on the case, right? In some cases, if you don't want what is chamfer, right? So that is basically just the fact that when I bevel, right, you see my edges move. And what that's actually doing is Maya is giving the bevel the chance to actually deform my model. Oh no, that's totally fine. I think that's an important thing as well. So Maya is giving the bevel the chance to deform my model. And what is happening is it's actually changing the buildup of my model, right? But if I turn the chamfer off, what you can see is that now the bevel is no more affecting my model. It is just adding edges to my model, which are going to help my model stay when I press 3, right? But to answer your question, yes, this is something that in high-end productions is definitely a good. But I've seen a lot of productions where it is whether to use bevels or not, with chamfer off or on, is just the fact of the highlight that you're looking for. If there is a very soft highlight that you're trying to achieve, you can absolutely use a bevel with the chamfer on, and that is going to be workable as well. Anyway, so let's come back to beveling this object here. So again, I was just selecting every edge that I want to keep sharp, and I went bevel edge. Okay. Now, after I went and did the bevel, I'm playing with the fraction to make sure that my edges are going to be closer together. And as I said, staying with two segments is always, I think, the best in my opinion, because it does this very cool thing where a lot of times if you're beveling corner edges, you get an n-gon at the side, okay? And n-gons are bad. N-gons are faces with anything more than 4 sides, right? This is an n-gon and it is not good because it's not going to let my model deform properly, and I might get highlight errors as well. So I want to try to avoid n-gons as much as possible, which is why I think beveling with two segments is one of the best things, because all you need to do to fix this n-gon is take your multi-cut and just cut diagonally, right? Wherever you see this n-gon being created, all you need to do is cut diagonally. And that solves your problem of all those n-gons. So keep in mind that whenever you're beveling a corner edge like this, if it's connected to a quad or a square and you bevel with two segments, you are going to be able to clean up that n-gon very easily. Okay. And the other reason why I think two segments is very good is because on an outer edge, whenever you have an L like this, right? So this is an inner edge of the L, and this is the outer edge of the L. Whenever you bevel on the outer edge of an L, the bevel will actually solve itself. Okay. And what I mean by that is like here, you can see that no n-gon was created and I did not need to fix anything, right? So that's great. That being said, let's go to the last thing before we start some modeling, which I think is very, very important, which is snapping. Okay. So a lot of times it's not enough for us to just be like, oh, I want this object to be close to this object. I'm just going to move it, right? And cool. A lot of times you want to be precise, you want to be exact, and you want to try to do your best job to make things line up as much as possible. And to do this, I think snapping is one of the most important things. So there are two things you can snap, right? You can either snap your model itself, okay? And what I mean by snap is if I hold down V, I can snap to a vertice, okay? So let's just turn on, if I hold down V and I'm just moving my model to any one vertice, okay? So this is snapping my model to any vertice that I take my cursor to, okay? But this is probably not what I want, right? And what's happening right now is my model is snapping from its pivot, okay? This is the pivot, and which is usually the center of the object. And if I hold V, it's snapping from that pivot to any other vertice that I hover over, yeah? So to give me more control, what I can actually do is I can snap the pivot as well. So if I hold down D and V at the same time, I can snap my pivot to any one of these vertices, okay? And something you'll see me do is I'm not holding my pivot directly and I'm not snapping my pivot directly, right? What I'm doing is I'm holding D and V and I'm sliding one of the arrows so that I can bring the pivot to any of these vertices, right? But I'm still not snapping them to that vertice exactly. I'm still keeping them on their same axis, okay? Whereas if I was to hold D and V and directly move this pivot, I would snap the pivot directly to one of these vertices, right? So in this case, if I want to move this object and have it sit flush with this other object, I can hold D and V, snap my pivot here, and then just hold V and snap my model or my object here, right? And that's what's gonna help. That being said, let's also just a second. I'm gonna fix my buttons. I just realized that I'm probably not sharing all my buttons. Just give me a second. Okay. Um, I think they should show up right now, but I don't want to spend too much time trying to fix this. So if it's not working, please feel free to jump in and just ask me what I'm doing, and I'm definitely gonna tell you, right? So cool. That was snapping. And I think that's a very important part of modeling. And that's one type of snapping, right? So I can snap to vertices. The other type of snapping is snapping to a grid. So um, if I press spacebar, I can see all my other views. Okay, so this is my side view, this is my front view, this is my top view. And if I press spacebar after hovering over any one of these views, I can jump into that view. Okay, so it's a quick way to jump in to perspective mode where I can move around and jump back to one of these modes where I have a locked camera. So here I can turn on my grid by clicking on this little button here. And now if I hold X, you can see that I'm snapping to the grid lines, okay? This can be helpful a lot of times when you're trying to snap things to the middle of your world or the center of your world, right? Yeah. So again, if you want to snap your pivot as well, you can just hold D, hold X, and you can snap your pivot, and you can actually snap your pivot to any one of the lines on the grid, right? And you might be like, why is this useful? Because when that becomes your pivot, you can do stuff like rotate around it, scale from it, and even use that to move and snap in increments to something else, right? So there are a lot of uses for it, but I definitely think now that we're gonna dive into some actual modeling, we're gonna see a little more of this. Okay. That being said, it would be, I think, ideal if you could spend your time, because what I'm going to be demonstrating right now is my workflow. It's my way of doing things and the way I model. So there are some things that might be different from the way other people do it, but please feel free to ask me if you're wondering why I did something specific. Yeah. So now that I've reinforced some of the major concepts, let's finally get down to doing some actual modeling, right? So this is going to be more of a demo to show you my workflow and my thought process, basically, while tackling a certain piece. We definitely don't have enough time today to do a whole asset, but we can surely do a part of it at least, right? So let's go through the basic steps. I'm just going to open up a new file. Um, okay, it's a blank file, a blank canvas. And I think what I want to show you here is not what buttons to press or what options to use or how to do specific things, but it's just the idea, right? The workflow, how you can think about tackling a certain object. Because I think a lot of times what is built easily is your technical skills, right? You understand where the buttons are, how do I do certain things, and that's what's going to come to you very naturally after a while. But things which are workflow related might take a while for them to be introduced to you, right? So, as I said, this is just my workflow, and let's get started. So, the asset that I will be demonstrating on today is a stun grenade. If any one of you want to be weapon artists anytime in the future, then definitely you'll be coming across a lot of props or assets like this, right? So I'm just pressing spacebar coming into my top view, and I'm just gonna go to view, image plane, and I'm gonna import my image, okay? And this is my reference image of the stun grenade that I'll be modeling. Okay. Also, shout out to PureRef. I'm not sponsored by them, but PureRef is an awesome software, and I love using it for putting together my references. And whenever I'm modeling, I always have a PureRef board right at the top. So I'm just gonna go ahead and open up my PureRef board as well. Okay, so here you see my little PRF board. The reason I like this software so much, and it's something that so many people use and love, is because you actually have the option to right click and make sure that your pure ref is always on top, which means no matter what I do in Maya, no matter what I click, I'm always going to be able to see my PureRef board, right? PureRef is great for laying out your references, and it's something that I use a lot. So I don't have a lot of extra references or anything super complex because I'm not going to be trying to get all the correct measurements and all that stuff. I'm just going to be trying to create the asset. Um, and yeah, and I don't need a lot of reference for that. Normally when you're modeling something and you're trying to go for realism, I definitely suggest having a lot of reference, a lot of supplementing reference, and that's always going to be helpful. But for today, we just need to understand the shape and the buildup of this object so that we can get to tackling it, right? So I think the first part that I think is so important is analyzing your model, right? Being able to understand how many shapes that are involved in your model. So for today, because we lack some time, we're only going to be tackling the body of the stun grenade, okay? And maybe these little clips as well, but mainly the body. And the reason I picked this asset to go with is because a lot of times, a lot of us find modeling cylindrical things challenging, right? And it's just because of how polygons behave on cylindrical objects. You can get highlight issues and weird things can happen if you're not careful. Yeah. So that being said, let's dive into modeling this stun grenade. The first thing I would like to say, which I've already said, is you need to make note of how many shapes are involved and you need to do some amount of planning, right? Remember earlier when I said there, as much as I would like modeling to be a completely artistic process, there definitely is a little bit of math involved, right? That being said, I'm gonna figure out how many parts I need. So for just this body, if I was to divide it, I would probably divide it into the base, the body itself, the middle, and the head. Okay. And as far as I can tell, the the bottom and the head, so the base and the head, are identical. Okay, at least from what I'm able to see right now from this reference and this reference, they look pretty identical to me, which means less work for me, right? I'm always trying to cut corners while I'm modeling. If I have the chance to save time, I'm gonna save time. So in this case, I just need to model one, either the top or the bottom, and I can duplicate it to get the other one. So I think a lot of times, even when I was just starting to model, I would think of, okay, this is a cylinder and there are holes in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make the cylinder first, and then I'm going to subtract the holes from it, right? But I think a lot of times it is easier to start from the holes or start from the smaller shapes and build up to the bigger shape. Okay. So that's something that you'll see me doing a lot of times is I will start from a smaller shape or a hole and then I will build the larger piece. Okay. So I'm just going to start here with the cylinder, and we can see that this cylinder has like 20 subdivisions on the axis. Another thing I like to do is keep things as simple as possible. And what I mean by that is I don't need all these subdivisions, okay? The lowest subdivisions I can go while still maintaining a nice circle is probably 8 subdivisions, okay? So if I go to my channel box right here, and I go to the inputs of my primitive shape, which is my cylinder, I can reduce this to 8. Okay. And you might be like, this is super low poly. Are you sure you want this? But keep in mind that when I add my supporting edge loops and I press 3, right, to subdivide it, it is going to become a nice circle, right? So I'm just trying to keep things as simple as possible by having less subdivisions to deal with in the first place. So I'm just going to delete the rest of this. And For people who are more new to this navigation, again, it's not all about getting exactly what buttons I'm pressing, but it's more about understanding the workflow so that when you choose to model something, right, you feel more confident in being able to tackle or approach that specific model. That being said, what you'll see me use a lot is control. If when you sorry, right click, when you press right click, it brings you to your selection menu where you can select between edges, vertices, faces, or your object itself, right? And that's just the different selection modes. And if you press shift and right click, that brings you to this amazing modeling toolkit, which is awesome and has a lot of options that you can use to model. Okay, that's mainly what I'm going to be using. So yeah, let's get started. I just went to face mode and I deleted everything else because as I said, I like to start with the smaller shape. So I'm just gonna go to my top view, press R to scale, scale this down and try to get an idea of how big this circle probably is, right? Also at the top here, I have this little button, which is my X-ray view. So by toggling that on, I can actually um, see through my object to see if I'm able to match that shape, at least generally. Okay. So right now I can see that, yeah, this hole is probably the same size. With that being said, I'm going to snap this back to the center of the world by holding X, right? So I just snapped it to the grid and I'm gonna center my pivot. Okay, you can see my pivot is off. Yes, I could press D and B and snap it like this, but the Maya shelf just has a button which can center your pivot, so you can press that as well. Now that I've centered my pivot, okay, I can extrude these corners to make the rest of my circle, okay? But I wanted to also, and this is how you might choose to do it sometimes, like this is how we would make um, that circle. So all I'm doing is scaling down my corner vertices, right? So I get one segment of this, right? So this is my one segment. If I start duplicating this and laying it out a few more times, I'm gonna get more of those segments and I'm gonna get more of these pieces, right? So also another thing is I always try to model flat as much as possible, right? Yes, we're working in 3D, but you want to make things as easy for you as possible. And the way to do that is model things flat and deform them later. And we'll get to that in a bit as well. But right now, I think that the difference between a 2D shape and a 3D shape is just an extrusion, right? It's just that thickness, which is changing something from 2D to 3D. So why not model in 2D and add that thickness later, right? So another thing that I'm gonna probably go through is instead of doing this kind of thing, I'm gonna start from a plane. Okay. So let's start from a plane like that. I'm gonna reduce my subdivisions to, let's say, 4. Okay. And what we saw before when I was using the cylinder, right, is that the least number of subdivisions on the axis you need to make a cylinder are 8, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, correct? We have those same number of edges, which means if I select these faces and I go shift right click to access my modeling menu, I can go to circularize components, okay? And now I have got that same circle, but in a different way, right? So either I could start from that shape, or in this case, because it's a circle and it's easy to build from another shape, I can also get it from something like this. Now, what I'm gonna try to do is just because I like to be a little more even with things, is I'm gonna scale down all my other words so that they're more or less straight, okay? Because as I said, quads should be square as much as possible at least. Now, let's try setting this up here. I think the scale is generally fine. I feel like the hole is the correct size. Now, what I'm gonna try to do is get the rest of these holes, okay? So I'm just scaling these vertices to get some thickness or get some distance between the holes. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna snap my pivot to the top, Control D to duplicate, and I'm gonna snap this right here to the bottom, okay? And that gives me two pieces. So I have my first hole, I have my second hole. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go Control D, and I'm gonna hold V to snap this right here to the bottom, okay? So I've got all three of my holes from this specific segment. I'm gonna select them, and I'm gonna go Mesh, Combine. Now, all of these have become the same object, and that's just gonna make it easier for me to work. But one thing that's still not matching is this top right here. So I'm just gonna select those verts and pull them up. I'm gonna select these verts, pull them down to get to the bottom. And now I have one segment. So while I'm looking at this reference, I'm probably gonna guesstimate and say if there are two holes here, there are probably two more on the sides and there are two more behind. So that leaves us with six, right? Which means if I select this, snap my pivot here, Control D to duplicate, hold V to snap. And then something cool is the duplicate special. So duplicate special is done with Shift and D. And what that allows you to do is just copy your transformation. So copy exactly what I did before when I moved, right? And I can duplicate. So because I duplicated and I moved, if I press Shift D, it's going to duplicate and move, duplicate and move, duplicate and move, duplicate and move. You can try this as well if you've not already tried it before. It's awesome. Shift D, duplicate special. Okay. Now that I pretty much have all my segments in question, so I have six, right? What I'm going to do again is go to Mesh, Combine to make sure that all of these are one singular shape. Now, I know what a lot of you might be thinking. This is still not the same shape, right? Because there are some vertices which have not been connected, right? Because I can actually pull them apart like this. But that's not something that I'm going to worry about just yet. So the reason why I said I like modeling flat most of the time is because making something that's flat, cylindrical, is just one deformer away. Okay. So if I go to my deformers here, there are a lot, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of time to explore a lot of these. But the one I think most useful one I've found is nonlinear bend. Okay, so it's the bend deformer. And the moment I select my object and I click on this deformer, I'm gonna get um, this little bar. Okay, and this bar is my deformer. So if I come down here to my attribute editor and I click on my bend deformer, I have curvature here. Okay, so I add my curvature and now my bend deformer has become a circle, but there's nothing happening yet, right? And why is this? So the reason is that my bend deformer needs to be facing the correct way. So if I press E to rotate and I start rotating it, you're gonna see that now it is actually working the way it should. Now, because I want to be more specific with this, I'm gonna hold J to snap, and I'm just gonna snap my deformer in increments of 15 degrees to slowly get to that 90-degree mark, right? So I've rotated 90 degrees, and now my object is fully deformed. Now that I have this, in most cases, what I like to do is I like to keep my original mesh and the deformer handy, just in case I need to change that shape later, you know? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep these here, and I'm just gonna select my mesh and duplicate it with Control D, and this is gonna be the new mesh that I work on, okay? I'm gonna hide everything else, so I'm gonna hide this to my original mesh and my deformer in case I need to use it at a later time, right? In case I find out that, oh, maybe the thickness was enough or I need to make any other kind of changes. So now that I have this cylindrical portion, right? Let's just pull that out of my reference here. Or actually, I'll just push my reference a little more. Now that I have the cylindrical body of um, my stun grenade, the next step for me is going to be to delete these holes, which actually I kind of forgot. But it's going to be super easy to just get rid of these holes. I'm just going to look from the top and I'm going to select, hold, shift and select. So I'm just adding to that selection, selecting all these holes, and I'm just going to delete them. And that gets rid of all these holes. From the side as well, I'm going to do the same. And I'm making sure to kind of line it up properly so that I'm selecting the ones on the other side as well. Yeah. And I've deleted those holes as well. And now I have the base of the body of my stun grenade. Now we're going to address that thing that, oh, maybe these vertices are not welded together, right? There probably are gaps in this mesh. All I need to do is select all my vertices. I'm going to go again, shift right click, merge vertices, and merge vertices. What that is going to do is any kind of gaps, it's going to fill up. And you see my distance threshold, I can just slide on this. And what you can probably see is that the numbers are running really fast and it's doing something weird. A lot of the sliders in Maya did not have a lot of control, at least at the starting point. What's going to give you more control over your sliders is holding control on your keyboard, and just sliding is going to give you more control. Okay, you can see the numbers now are moving a little slower. Um, did someone have a question? Okay, maybe not. Holding control is going to give you more control, but if you hold control and shift, that's going to give you even more control. Okay. So now you can see these numbers are going very slowly. And basically what this is telling Maya is anything that's ahead of this distance threshold, go ahead and merge those vertices, right? So because these three vertices are very close, when I start increasing the distance threshold, it merges all of them together, right? But I don't want that. I just want to make sure that the ones that were close together have been merged. And now if I press 3, this is a good tell to understand if those vertices have been merged. So now I have the body of my stun grenade. And now I'm going to take care of the top part. Okay, so here is where a little bit of math comes into play, because what I have up here is I'm gonna make the head or the base, whichever one. Maybe I'll go for the head right now. I'm gonna make the head with a separate object, right? So for me to connect that head to the body, I'm gonna have to make sure that the head has the same amount of segments as the body. Okay. So for example, you can see I have this little display here, and this is called the heads up display. You can find it under display, heads up display, polygon. Okay. It shows you all the polygons you have in your scene, all the vertices you have in your scene. And if you select your edges, or if you select anything, it's going to show you what you're selecting, right? So in this case, I'm selecting some edges. So it's showing me how many edges I have selected. In the same way, I'm going to select this top ring, because that is the ring that's going to attach to something else, right? And this ring has 24 segments, which means in the new piece that I'm going to create, I need to have at least, or I'm not going to say at least, I need to have exactly 24 segments so that they can both connect properly. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make this top part just by bringing in a cylinder. Okay. Again, I'm just holding J to snap rotate to 90 degrees. And I'm going to move this up here. Okay. In the meantime, I'm also going to make sure that I have my main object snapped to the center of the grid, something like that. And I think I'm good to proceed. I don't know if it's at the center of the grid, but yeah, it is. Or maybe it's not. So let's just snap that. That's looking better. Now, the easiest way I can think of to create this kind of object is to use a cylinder and reduce the sides enough that it becomes super low poly like this. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, and I'm assuming there are 3 more segments on the back, right? So 1 flat face here, 2 flat face, 3 flat face, and then 3 at the back as well. So I'm just going to go to my channel box subdivisions axis, and I'm going to put in 6 subdivisions. So I get 1 face here, 1 here, 1 here, and 3 more at the back, right? So I have 6, and that's pretty much exactly what I need to make this. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my top view. I'm gonna scale this stuff down, and I'm gonna try to make sure that I'm getting that thickness and also the height, okay? So you can see that right now, I'm not trying to match the height of the curves. I'm just trying to match the height of these points, okay? I hope you can see my cursor. So yeah, I'm not trying to match the curves just yet. Now I have what I need to get started. And as I said, I like to make my life as easy as possible. So I'm just gonna delete everything that I don't need, okay? So the reason I deleted all of this stuff is because I'm just gonna work on this part and I can just duplicate the other side of it later because it's technically exactly the same. So what I'm gonna do is let's add segments in the middle of all of these. So I'm just holding down Control and Shift, which is snapping my edges that I'm adding to 50% increments, okay? Let's just go here and I'm gonna try to overshoot this curve and go a little higher, okay? Same thing at the bottom. I'm gonna go with something like that. And now I'm going to use my bevel to actually smooth out the surface, right? So I'm just going to select my edges. And if I go shift right click bevel, you see, I told you it's going to average out my edges. That's what it's doing right now. And it's allowing me to create this nice, smooth, curved shape, right? So just by making a super janky, low poly shape and beveling it, you can get something much smoother and nicer, okay? Now, one thing I want to keep in mind is my total segments were 24, okay? The ones that I need to attach, which is why I added one segment in the middle here, because 24 divided by 12, which means I need 12 segments in this piece because this is just half the piece, right? And every segment, I'm gonna bevel into 4, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is, if my math is correct, and I'm really bad at math, it should be 12. So if I have 12 in this piece, that means if I duplicate it, I'm gonna have 12 in the other piece as well, right? So perfect, I've gotten my silhouette correct. All I need to do now is take this piece, duplicate it with Control D, and I'm just gonna hold J to snap rotate it to the other side. I have both my pieces right now. I'm ready to go mesh, combine, and I am gonna do the same thing, select all my vertices, and I'm gonna go shift right click merge vertices, merge vertices. And now all my vertices are merged. Now, the next thing is gonna be creating this shape. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna extrude from here. I'm gonna press R to scale it inward. And I'm gonna try to match this kind of shape, but this shape is a little more nuanced than the one I see here at the bottom. So I do need to be a little more careful about it. So I have my shape selected, but definitely it needs to be a circle, right? So super easy. I'm just gonna hold shift right click and I'm gonna go and circularize components. That is gonna give me a nice clean circle. And I pretty much have what I need here at the top, okay? So what I can see is this part comes pretty close to the edge, something like that. And maybe it's something like that. And then I'm just gonna press Control E again, extrude, R to scale, and I'm gonna scale this in to get this portion of thickness here. And I'm gonna Control E, extrude, R to scale again to get this kind of divot here. And again, Control E, R to scale, and scale it all the way in. At this point, I'll go Shift right click, fill hole. And for now, normally I would spend time fixing this, but I think we're gonna run a little short on time. And what I mean by fixing it is just like properly cutting this so that I'm making quads and not triangles, right? But for now, just to fill this up, I'm just gonna select this face, go Shift right click, poke face. And this is how most caps of cylinders look like, right? There's a bunch of triangles. I don't condone this. I don't think it's amazing, but just to move forward, that's what I'm gonna do. And now the last part, which is the bottom part, I'm just gonna do the same thing, extrude, R to scale, pull it inward. And again, I need to just make sure that it's circularized. So Shift right click, circularize components, and that should give me a nice circle. I can bring it in to kind of match up my other shape. And in a nutshell, I think I'm pretty much done. The last thing I'm gonna do for this top piece before I connect it to the bottom is do my bevels. So another thing I like to do is a lot of times we go double click select edge loops to bevel them, right? But I like to just double click a face loop and hold control right click, which opens up this other selection marking menu, which allows you to switch your selection to edges, to edge parameter. So I can select border edges in this way, right? Now, if I just bevel these, okay, because when I press 3, everything crumbles, right? But I do need to keep these edges sharp as well. As I said earlier, because these edges are technically on the outer part of an L, I can actually select them without having any repercussions to the rest of my shape. Because when I bevel, it is actually going to solve itself by creating 3 quads, right? And that's perfect. I don't want to have to worry about that at all, right? So by doing that, I have effectively been able to get my bevels, being able to get the sharpness of my shape. And when I press 3, it doesn't crumble anymore. Okay. I didn't even know the circularize option even exists. Yes, circularize is awesome, and you can use it whenever you're trying to make circles. Okay. Now I'm just gonna do another extrusion here to get this kind of divot here. So let's just go extrude. I'm gonna pull it in something like that. And I think actually instead of that, I'm gonna extrude and I'm gonna slide on the thickness. Okay, so I'm sliding on the thickness to reduce the thickness. And I'm gonna slide on the offset, which is gonna give me this kind of valid effect, okay, which I think is what's going on in here. So I'm trying to get this valid effect by sliding on the offset, again, while holding Control and Shift. And that is what is giving me that effect. So again, I just need to select this edge, bevel it. Actually, maybe this one as well. I'm just gonna bevel all of these together. Let's go nice 2 segments just to be safe. Press 3, and that's looking pretty good, right? So I already have the top done. I have my body done, and now I'm ready to connect the body to the top. And also like the circularize and all the other tools you see me using are just Shift right click away, right? I press Shift right click and I get bevel, delete edge, multi-cut, insert edge loop, edit edge flow. A lot of these that we haven't seen yet, but I'm sure you will when you start diving in a little deeper. Now I know that to combine both of these, I need to go mesh, combine, and I have combined both the objects into one, okay? Now, the last thing I'm gonna do is when 2 objects are combined, but they are not connected or bridged together, if you double click an object, it can allow you to select that whole object, okay? So by doing that, I can just kind of select this and move it a little closer. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select this whole edge loop. I'm gonna select this whole edge loop. I'm gonna go Shift, right click, and bridge. okay? And what that did is if you have equal edge loops from your first selection and equal edge loops in your second selection, when you hit bridge, you are going to close up that place, or it's just going to close up all of those edges that you've selected. Now that I've done that, I know that I probably don't need that extra edge. I'm just going to select it and I'm going to delete it. That was just so that I could bridge it together, right? Now, last thing I need to do here, some nice bevels just to make sure that I'm holding the sharp highlight here. And pretty much that's my stun grenade done. As I said before, I like to make things easier. So instead of trying to model the bottom, I'm literally just gonna delete half of this. I'm gonna duplicate this other half, move the pivot right here to the bottom, and I'm gonna rotate it while holding J to snap. And that's gonna give me my top and my bottom. Let's just go mesh, combine, select all my vertices, merge vertices, merge vertices. To make sure that everything's connected, I just press 3 to make sure that everything's holding together nicely and I'm getting nice highlights. Everything is looking good for now, and I am ready to finally add some thickness to this. So if you see how long I've waited to add thickness, wouldn't deleting edges like that leave extra vertices? No, so what I did when I was deleting edges or deleting that whole edge loop, and thanks for bringing that up. I think that's very, very important. A lot of times when we select an edge loop to delete and just hit delete, it looks like you deleted that edge loop. But when you try to select your vertices, you will see that a whole other set of vertices from that edge loop have been left behind, okay? And to avoid this, you always want to make sure that while deleting any edges, you're holding control and you're pressing delete. Okay, so control and delete is going to allow you to get rid of all those vertices while you're deleting. Something that I do instead, because I've just gotten used to using the shift right click marking menu so often, is I go shift right click and I go delete edge. And that is another safe way to guarantee that no vertices are being left behind. Okay. Because sometimes, in my opinion, when I've been working, what has happened is I think I clicked control delete, but I missed clicking control and I just deleted, and now I have those vertices, right? So just to be absolutely sure, shift right click delete edge is awesome. Cool. So I'm pretty much done with the grenade. The last thing I'm gonna do is add that thickness, okay? And you can see how long I've waited to add this thickness because that is what's gonna make things much more complicated to model. Whenever you have thickness on an object, it's always gonna make things much harder to model on. How would you add the interior cylinder within the outer shape? It is closed and hard. Yeah, so what I feel like, because this interior cylinder, you don't see the connection point, you don't see where it attaches. I think it's going to be as simple as just creating a new primitive cylinder and just scaling it inside, right? Because I'm probably never going to see that top and I'm probably never going to see that bottom, right? So just having something like this is going to be totally fine. You'll hear a lot of people say this, and I stand by this completely, is if you don't see it, you don't need to model it, okay? So anyway, we added that inner cylinder as well, but the last thing is going to be for me to add um, some thickness to this. So all I'm going to do is select my object. So double click is going to select my whole object. I'm going to go Control E to extrude. And I'm going to slide on the thickness to give me some thickness. Now, because I'm going into a minus value while adding the thickness, my object has become black because it's now flipped, okay? Very quick solution. Whenever this happens, remember that you can just go, this is to do with the display of the mesh, right? So just remember mesh display, reverse. And that's going to flip it back to normal. And now I have that thickness as well. Last thing I need to do is if I press 3, you can see that my holes are not holding up well. I need to make sure that they're beveled so that they're not crumbling, right? So for this, I'm gonna turn on symmetry, okay? I'm gonna turn on symmetry, and the way to find out where you need your symmetry is if I go here to my top view, I can see that the red axis or the x-axis is the one pointing left to right or right to left, which means if I wanted to mirror from left to right or right to left, I could just turn on symmetry, world X, and now anything I do on one side is going to be duplicated. Okay? So just quickly, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm selecting a whole face loop just to be uh, quick with things. And again, to switch my selection, I'm just holding Control, right click, two edges, two edge parameter. Now, the reason I'm doing two edge parameter is because if I do two edges, it is going to select all these edges in the middle, okay? Which is why I just wanted to select the border edges, which can be done with edge parameter. This marking menu also allows you to switch your selection to vertices, faces, edges, to even UVs, right? But for now, I'm just gonna go to edge parameter, do my nice bevels, two segments just to be safe. Let's play with that fraction. It does look to be a little soft, so I'm just gonna bevel that to be a little soft. And there we have it, right? That's pretty much the whole grenade done. The last thing which I wanted to keep as a bonus was how to create this thing. But instead, I'm just gonna settle for this ring because we barely have any time, and I do want to keep the last few minutes to talk to you all and get some ideas of how you felt about this workshop as well. So to get this little circle, you can start with a primitive called a helix. Okay, so right here you see a lot of primitives, but this is not all that Maya has to offer. If you go to create and you go to polygon primitives, you can find something that's called a helix, which kind of looks like a spring. Okay, the moment I create this helix, let me just isolate this. The moment I create this helix, you see this primitive shape being made. Just like I was controlling the cylinder, I can come here to my inputs and I can change stuff like my radius. So the radius is going to define how thick those coils are. The width is going to define how like broad it is, right? And the height is going to define how close together these coils are. So let's just do one. And I'm going to say I probably want two coils or maybe one coil in this case. One coil. And that's good to go. I'm just going to reduce the height a little bit. Let's go 0.5. 4 maybe. That's close enough. And maybe let's go 1.5 coils. Yeah. And super quickly, I have been able to create this shape very, very fast, right? If you want, you can play around with this more, try to get more control out of it and see the cool stuff that you can do. But very quickly, I was able to create the same thing right up here. And the cool part is you can also reduce the subdivisions. So if you want lesser subdivisions, like let's do something like that, right? Super low poly, you can get that as well. And press 3, of course, is going to make it smooth. You're going to get a nice coil. Okay. I did hope that I would get to go over this piece as well because it's quite interesting and it would be a new technique. But I think that's all the time we have for today. So I'm gonna stop here. I hope this was helpful in terms of understanding how to approach certain things, right? A lot of times when we see an asset and you're like, oh, I want to model this, the hardest thing is how to start, right? And I hope I was able to give you an idea on how to start. I hope this was just the beginning and you jump down the rabbit hole from here and start discovering more things about modeling, find new deformers, find new ways to speed up your modeling process, right? Because there's just so many things to do and the possibilities are endless. Maybe if I do another workshop, I would love to jump a little more in depth as well. I know for a lot of Maya beginner folks, like this could have been a little overwhelming. But as I said, again, this is something to get you excited about the process and not get you focused on the tools, right? Because the tools come with time, the tools come with practice. But building your workflow, building your way of thinking, I think is one of the most important things for artists, right? Um, so yeah, I think we have a couple more minutes left. I wanted to open the discussion to all of you. Do you have any questions? Would you like to say hi? Tell me something about yourselves. Tell me about your modeling journey. Anything of the sort. I'm all ears. Anyone is modeling a spaceship. How to start modeling the base shape? So it depends on what kind of I think this is a direct message as well. So Moksh is asking if you're modeling a spaceship, how do you start modeling the base shape? It depends on what shape the main body is. Maybe we can discuss it at another time and you can show me what your reference looks like, right? And I can maybe tell you a good approach to start. A lot of times, I think when modeling something big like a spaceship, especially if it's complex, you want to start out with a proxy blockout. In my case, because I knew my shape wasn't super complex and I knew exactly how to tackle the pieces. And of course, that comes with time and practice as well. I knew exactly where to start and exactly where to go from there. Can I send you a text on LinkedIn regarding this? Definitely, definitely. Please feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I love connecting, especially with other modelers, and I love seeing what everyone's up to. I was wondering, do you recommend using the least subdivisions as possible because it simplifies process? Yeah, pretty much. Because a lot of times, like if I was working with the circle, right? Imagine if instead of going with 8 subdivisions, I went for 16 subdivisions, right? That would be totally like not very useful because now I would have to, instead of going with my original, which was 24 edges, I would probably have something like 120 edges, right? Just because my cylinders or my circles were too dense. So a lot of times I think by using as less polygons as possible, while still maintaining your shape, it is possible to let the subdivision do the rest of the work. So of course you want to create the shape. You want to be more you want to be more detailed about it, right? Like having a cube and saying, oh, I want to create a sphere, so I'm just going to hit 3 and create a sphere. This is not going to be the best thing, right? Instead, if you wanted to create a sphere, what would be better to do is to at least have one subdivision. So you're at least telling Maya that this is what I'm giving you and take this and make this smooth, right? So you're giving it the basis to create that smoother shape from it, which is why I think it's good to stick with lower subdivisions. Do you have any recommendations for learning complex hard surface modeling focused towards VFX or feature film? I have one person to mention. Again, I don't get paid for endorsing these people, but check out Elemensa on YouTube. Amazing modeler, amazing videos, and they have a lot to offer as well. So if I know I don't have enough time with you, with all of you today, but I want to give you as much as possible, right? So Elemenza, Elementza is the spelling. You can find them on YouTube. Also, it's 7:30. I'm here to answer questions. But I'm just gonna say for everyone who needs to leave, it was very nice having you here. Thank you for staying through the process, and thank you for being here. Please feel free to add me on LinkedIn. If you're looking for me, you can ask me right now, and I can send you my stuff. You can add me wherever, and I would always be down for a chit chat or a conversation about modeling. Right? Not only modeling,